Welcome to this special edition of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. Today we will be interviewing Dyane Harwood, the author of Birth of a New Brain, and we are hoping that this is the first of many author interviews. As always, I'd like to remind listeners that we do discuss a diverse range of mental health topics, and this may not be suitable for some listeners. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence.
And today we are extremely excited and happy to welcome onto our podcast the author of Birth of a New Brain, Dyane Harwood.
Nice to finally speak to you. We've talked on Twitter quite a lot.
We sure have, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you both for having me and for reading my book. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk to us. I think this is going to be where we find out a lot more about you. So obviously we've read your book, and what I think we'll start with is the book blurb again, just so we know where we are.
So, when a new mother becomes manic overnight from a rare form of bipolar disorder, she stops at nothing to find the mental stability she needs to stay alive. After the birth of her baby triggers a manic maelstrom, Dyane Harwood struggles to survive the bewildering highs and crippling lows of her brain's turmoil. Birth of a New Brain vividly depicts her postpartum bipolar disorder, an unusual type of bipolar disorder and postpartum mood and anxiety disorder. During her childhood, Harwood grew up close to her father, a brilliant violinist in the Los Angeles Philharmonic who had bipolar disorder. She learned how bipolar disorder could ravage a family, but she never suspected that she'd become mentally ill until her baby was born. Harwood wondered if mental health would always be out of her reach. From medications to electroconvulsive therapy, from redwood forest baths to bibliotherapy, she explored both tradition and unconventional methods of recovery in between harrowing psychiatric hospitalizations. Harwood reveals how she ultimately achieved a stable mood. She discovered that despite having a chronic mood disorder, a new, richer life is possible. Birth of a New Brain is the chronicle of one mother's perseverance, offering hope and grounded advice for those battling mental illness.
My life in a nutshell.
Brilliant. So I think, first of all, we should probably reveal to you, because I don't think you've heard the episode, that both myself and Becky gave your book 5 stars.
Thank you. Okay, your check's in the mail. Your check's in the mail.
No, we both really enjoyed the way you expressed yourself, and you were open about all of the things that you went through when you started to deal with your bipolar disorder, and also how, and the things that led up to that diagnosis, and also the hospitalizations. I mean, I think from what I understand, you were very open and you acknowledged all of the issues that are associated with hospitalization and stigma around mental health issues in general. So I think now that we've said thank you so much for writing the book, why in the first place did you decide to write your book?
Well, I'd always been a writer I identified myself as a writer since I was a little girl. And I have my mom to thank for that. She just really encouraged me as a reader, first and foremost. And she's the one who gave me my first copy of the famous book, A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, which has just been made into a Disney film. Don't get me started on that. But she also gave me another really significant book for me. It was called Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. And I started to write, and I wrote throughout college, although this is going to be funny. I majored in English literature, not creative writing, because I didn't think I had what it took to be a great writer. I didn't see myself as that good of a writer. So I did do a literature degree, but I just didn't, my self-esteem as a writer was still pretty rock bottom. But then when I got out of school, I decided to do magazine writing because I'd always loved reading magazines. And I also did just local newspapers, things like that. And I had success in that area. So I built on my small wins, so to speak. And then, so I should probably answer your question. I didn't think I had what it took to write a book because I didn't think I had anything important to say, or that was new. It seemed like everyone else was writing the great, brilliant books until I was diagnosed with this form of bipolar disorder. And we can talk more about this, but literally when childbirth triggered my bipolar disorder, I had a really crazy thing happened to me that not a lot of people know about, and it's called hypergraphia. And what it is it's compulsive nonstop writing, and you write on weird things too. Like if you don't have paper around, that's no problem. You'll write on your arm. You'll write on.
But I remember you writing this in your book, and how even when it was painful, you were still writing.
Exactly. I mean, I had carpal tunnel in the past, and I totally reactivated it. So I was in terrible crushing pain. I really was, and I didn't let that stop me. So I literally started writing as soon as I got home from the hospital, and my husband had to hide the laptop. And then I just found some old notebooks. The people who usually have hypergraphia have temporal lobe epilepsy. It's not so much reported by people with bipolar disorder, usually the manic side, obviously. But I'm hearing more and more stories of people with bipolar disorder who do the same thing. So it's very interesting, the connections when you think of it in the brain, because they do actually use the same medication for epilepsy and bipolar disorder. One of the same medications is used for both. We'll have the secret psychiatrist address that one.
Yeah.
But so I literally started writing when I got home, and then 10 years later, I had a book. Basically, I felt like I had to write this book in order to bring awareness to this particular form of bipolar disorder, because no one else had written about it. So I thought that was in my corner. And then I also thought that I did have a worthy story. I finally felt like it was worth telling, So
yeah. So with the hindsight in mind, when do you think your bipolar actually started? Because in the book, you talk about, obviously, the second pregnancy triggering it. However, you also talk about earlier episodes that in hindsight you remember and identify as when you were manic and things like that.
That's a really great question, and it's something I didn't fully explore in my book. So thank you for thinking of that one. I mean, technically, I did mention the following part where when I was in my very early 20s, I didn't sleep because I was working at a huge festival in San Jose, which is the epicenter of Silicon Valley. It was called the San Jose America Festival. And I was in charge of the arts and crafts booths and the food booths. And I was up all night, like marking the 10 by 10 spaces on the grass with chalk because I was so freaked out and stressed out. We had like 140 vendors coming. So by not sleeping, that triggered pretty much, it was hypomania that was edging into mania, because I started doing things I never would do normally. Like I don't know if you remember, I started screaming at someone because she criticized my boss, and I was just totally out of control. And then I did a mini spending spree and things like that. But I was so exhausted from this whole thing that I slept really well, the next few days. And so I basically stopped that incident by sleeping. Yeah. Now, once you turn on something like this, sometimes you can't turn it off that nice and neatly, but I honestly did. But I think that's when things started to really go haywire in my brain. So so that's when it started, I think, in my early 20s and on. So
I found it quite interesting how you were first initially giving a diagnosis of depression before you then went on to realize that actually it was something more. And we spoke about this when we did the podcast, myself and Becky. We talked about how most people can understand depression because it is more readily accepted, I think, as a mental health condition than perhaps mania and hypermania. And so because of that, we were like, oh, I can understand why someone would go with depression first rather than taking everything into account.
That's a good point. That is, and people still don't really, I think if you went on the street, go to Piccadilly, wherever, and say, can you define depression and can you define mania? I think most people would have no problem with depression, and a lot of people would have problems with symptoms of mania.
Yeah. So I think the next thing that I wanted to ask was that you obviously had a very close relationship with your dad, the way you write about him and the things that you, particularly when you were in your childhood, the way that you felt that you needed to make him happy when he was going through depression and things. And I was just wondering, how much openness was there about your dad's mental health condition? Because he was diagnosed with bipolar 1 as well.
That's right. And back then, technically, this was in the 70s, so they called it manic depression, but I don't really remember hearing that phrase. And I was never sat down and given like a whole speech about, okay, well, this is what I have. or, from my mom, this is what your father has. There was no open education. And I don't mean that as a criticism. It just wasn't done back then. There wasn't the social awareness. And then, but I did always notice all the pills on his beautiful wooden armoire. And there's just all these bottles of pills on there. And I just was like, why is he taking all these different things? But I didn't feel like asking. There's too many other things going on. Didn't really. And then part of me didn't, children are really intuitive, I think. I think part of me didn't want to know. Like I knew I had a bad feeling about them.
Yeah.
So ask, don't tell.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I guess if you didn't know what was going on, it was easier for you to deal with in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. But,
So do you think that not discussing your father's diagnosis with you, has that impacted your perception of mental health, especially before you were diagnosed yourself?
I think it would have been helpful just in the sense that, like, I could have recognized it wasn't like I was told, had my head in the sand. Like I could have put two and two together and recognized certain symptoms like, oh yeah, dad told me he had this. And it would have, who knows, it could have helped me somehow that way. It's hard to say, but I think it would have definitely helped. It wouldn't have been fun or pleasant to know about, but it would have been good. And so, so now I'm definitely handling things differently with my own children, which I know we'll talk about.
Yeah, I think we wanted to.
That was, I think, our next question. How you've approached it differently with your girls.
Well, with them, I mean, they've known for a long time, and they did come visit me in the hospital during the hospitalizations when they were very little. But this whole time I've been working on this book, and I've been very vocal with them about what bipolar is. And there's a lot more awareness now. Because when my dad had it, that was the 70s and early 80s. But now they're in their schools, there's awareness going on. So I really wanted my daughters to know about bipolar disorder, and I wanted to be able to answer their questions. And the inevitable question was, of course, will I get it? And I wanted to be able to tell them a statistic and also just reassure them that worst case scenario, if they have it, they'll have a family that knows how to deal with it better than most families on the planet. Yeah. we'll get them treated, One thing my dad did tell me when he and I did start talking about his illness when I was a teenager before college time was I did ask him if he thought I would get it. And I never even said what it was. I just asked him, will I get the same thing you have? And he did say, like, I think there's going to be a cure, or there's going to be a cure by the time if you had it, there'll be a cure. So he was trying to reassure me and out of love. But I don't do that with my girls because I just don't know if there's going to be a cure during their lifetime. So I don't want to give them false hope. Kind of harsh sounding, hearing myself say that, but it's good. I think it's important to be realistic too.
Did you ever speak to your dad about what triggered his to come out, or like what age that happened to him?
I've heard, that's such a great question. I have heard that he was 18, which is actually the most common time for bipolar 1 disorder, as far as I've heard, is the adolescent period. I wish he was alive for a lot of reasons, but I wish I could ask him questions like that. Because my mom, I don't like to get her upset thinking about it. And I don't know if she would remember stuff like that either. But I do know that he had it come out early. And it's really common in musicians. Like his stand partner, I don't know if I wrote about this in the book, but I'm fine about discussing it. I'm just not going to say a name. But when you have a stand partner in an orchestra, a lot of times you become very close to that person. Of course, it could be the opposite too, but they become a big part of your life. And his stand partner had bipolar disorder and took her life by suicide. So due to bipolar disorder. So it's just, so I remember hearing about that, and I wish I wasn't very sensitive or compassionate at the time. I could kick myself now, but anyway, it's all water in the bridge. And again, when my postpartum bipolar disorder manifested, that was in 2007. And I've seen this amazing sea change in, awareness about mental health stigma, nonprofits. There's 20 million nonprofits now compared to how there used to be. So I don't want to sound like a unicorn singing a song about rainbows, but I think things are getting a lot better, There's hope now. Whereas before there was like nothing.
So one thing that I was intrigued about was, what are the main differences between bipolar 1 and postpartum bipolar disorder? Is it purely the case of the time of onset? So obviously your bipolar manifested to kind of obvious symptoms when you gave birth to your second child.
Right. Well, the primary difference is the matter of timing, with childbirth as the triggering event. But in addition to that, which is different from regular bipolar 1, is that I call it the trifecta from hell, which was a severe sleep deprivation all of a sudden because you go through labor and you can't sleep at night, or you're feeding a baby. And then my genetic predisposition, I can say it, my father, having an immediate family member with bipolar disorder. And then the mysterious, incredibly powerful hormones. Those three things were also triggers. They all came at once, like the perfect storm we've heard about on Everest, So that is different than the other forms of bipolar disorder.
And are the symptoms similar? Obviously, you still suffer with periods of depression and mania and hypermania.
Right. The symptoms are definitely very similar, I'd say. I mean, you still go through bouts of depression, suicidal ideation, possibly, and hypomania and mania. Because if it is a postpartum bipolar 1 in my case, and as your secret psychiatrist, I listened to the bipolar episode and it was awesome, the first one. She talked about the differences between hypomania and mania, and how bipolar 1 is with full-blown mania. And well, she went into, I won't repeat her because she is way more knowledgeable than I am about it.
So the one thing that I had never realized before was that in some cases the bipolar depression can be medication resistant. And just reading your words about you trying all these different medications and how they weren't working and how your mood was so depressed, our hearts just broke for you. And each time you tried a new medication, myself and Becky were like, please let that work. And each time it didn't, and you tried another one. And can you tell us a bit more about that side of things and how you dealt with that? Because we were just like, wow, how are you still going?
I don't know. I mean, I do know I couldn't have done it without having my husband. I have to give him credit, and my children, because if they were, and eventually my dog. But because if they weren't here, I can't really say what I know. I wouldn't be here right now, actually, because there was this one instance where I had to ask my husband to drive me to the hospital after I took amitriptyline. I don't know if it's okay to say the medication.
Yeah,
I've taken that myself, and I did not react well to that either.
Really? Yeah, I've heard, it's like with any medication, it can be, a hit or a major miss. And it's funny because it's also, brand name is called Elavil. And I thought, gosh, that sounds, Elavil sounds like elevate. Maybe this is going to be the one to elevate my mood. And that was the one out of the 25 plus medications I took. That was the dangerous one. The one, I mean, I'll just be honest. Like, it made me feel suicidal to the point where I was like, get me to an ER now. And if he wasn't here, what would I have done? I don't know. I don't know if I would have had the presence of mind to call 911. So my heart goes out to people who don't have a support person right there in their lives, because that to me is unimaginable, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But yeah, it was kind of like, it's just crazy. Like each time I tried a new med, it's like looking for the right boyfriend or girlfriend, or is this going to be the one? And I get a teeny bit of hope each time I would try the new one, but I was very negative and pessimistic deep down, because as you both know, I just didn't think anything would ever help me. And then when horrible things, like when my dad died, I was like, that's it. No medication is working. It's either ECT or that's it. And that's why I'm such a proponent of ECT, and talk about imperfect. A lot of people have bad reactions to it. And believe me, I know all about it. But for me, it totally worked. And so
it's like the medication, is it? Like you said, it either works or it doesn't. And
I know.
The same with ECT. It's, for some people it wouldn't be the answer, but from your description, for you, it definitely sounds like it was a lifesaver.
It really was. There's a very strong anti-psychiatry movement, which I know about because I actually, at one point, I explored it when I decided to not take medication. So I've been on both sides of the fence, and I'm going to stick with the side of the fence that saved my life. And I don't have the worst side effects in the world at all. And it's like, yeah, it's hard to say, like, how can you test if someone has had memory loss? Because, you could ask me a question and I could just say, oh, yeah, that happened. But I really don't think I had that much memory loss from ECT, which is one of the biggest side effects.
Did you have it in the short term, though? I mean, the reason I ask is an ex of mine, I saw his mother go through ECT. And I remember going to the hospital with her, and when she came out, she couldn't recognize her husband, and she kept asking where my ex's dad was, her first husband, and just didn't know who I was at all. And I just wondered, but that came back after a few hours.
Ooh, I mean, that's extreme. That's scary. And I'm really glad it came back. I didn't have any of that, thank goodness, but that's scary. And I've heard, worse things, which I won't share on this program, but like you said, like it could be applied to medication too. I mean, anything really. You could talk about, a car can kill someone. Are you not going to drive a car? Because sorry, I have to wipe that judgmental tone out of my voice now. But yeah, I'm glad it existed. And just to quick follow up to that is that my father actually had ECT done, and I don't remember any of his experience because I was definitely shielded from it, but everyone was freaking out because they thought that he might lose his ability to play his violin. And I witnessed that did not happen with him. It didn't help lift his depression, but it didn't affect his ability to play. And he had a job for many years after that in the LA Philharmonic, where that's a top orchestra in the world.
Yeah. And that must have been early on before they were necessarily putting people fully asleep when they were doing it.
I don't know. I hope not. Because I loved getting anesthesia. I was like, it was so wonderful. 10 seconds, you're out.
They say count back from 10, and I never remember, I think beyond about 8.
One time, and I don't think I put this in the book, so you're getting the special edition podcast here. But, one time I forgot, I guess you're supposed to go take a wee, as you call it. Before you get the treatment, because it relaxes your bladder, and I totally spaced on that. And apparently when I had the treatment, I wet my pants, and I was so mortified. Like when I woke up, I saw I was wearing scrubs. And I was like, what the hell? Why am I wearing scrubs? And it turns out I was really embarrassed, but the nurses were lovely. The doctors were lovely. They're like, don't worry about it. It happens all the time. But I was embarrassed. So if you get ECT, take a wee. Maybe a bumper
advice.
Great advice.
I know. If you learn anything from this, But yeah, so I'm definitely pro ECT, and I hope. And they are coming up with new things now too. There's ketamine, which is everything's controversial. Ketamine. There's TMS, which is transcranial. I'm not going to say that again. Transcranial magnetic stimulation. There you go. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, and there's even a deep brain implant, kind of like a pacemaker, but for your brain. I watched that in a documentary on National Geographic called something like Ride the Lion or something. So there's stuff, there's new things. That's extreme too. But
I suppose if nothing had worked for you, you have to start looking at more extreme treatments and stuff.
Exactly. So when people have attacked me for choosing to have ECT or choosing to take the 2 medications that have kept me going since 2013, I'm like, well, can you talk to my girls and ask them how they would feel with a dead mother, and then we can have a real conversation. And then of course they're like, oh, you should go do some holistic stuff. And I'm a huge fan of holistic modalities. Don't get me wrong, but there comes a time, it's a personal decision, and if I'm gonna, I'm taking things that have been around for 50 or 60 years, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. No, I'm kidding. Sorry.
Actually, in your book, you talk about alternative therapies that you look up, things like holy basil that you look up, as well as fish oils and things like that. Are you still taking and looking at alternatives?
I am with some of those. I've become, since February, when I broke my jaw, I've become a vegan. I decided to become a vegan when I was sitting around watching a bunch of documentaries about veganism and plant-based eating. So I was going to go get my trusty omega-3 supplements, because I do think they help. I can't tell a huge difference. And then I realized, like, fish oil, you can't have fish oil anymore, but they make an algae an algae farm, which is where the fish get their omegas. So I buy the algae farm. That's probably way more than you wanted to know, but that is the the topic of my new book. I'm going to explore. I'm going to write about whether or not veganism and plant-based diets can really help with mental health, and I'm going to research it and interview people about it. But the jaw thing was kind of symbolic because if I had broken my jaw when I was still going through all these horrible things, I think that would have put me over the edge. And this time I got through it.
How did you break your jaw?
I was just out walking my dog, and it was totally my fault. I was looking at my stupid cell phone, and it's totally my fault. Actually, not. It's 70% my fault. I was walking through a tennis court with Lucy, and they had left one of the tennis nets on the ground, which I caught my foot in, and I just slammed down onto the concrete on my face.
Ouch.
Wow.
They shouldn't have had the net on the ground, but that's hazardous. But I should have seen it coming. So I kind of learned my lesson. Yeah, it's basically like driving and texting. It's the same. It is. And so I had to have 4 screws put in my gums with bands and all kinds of stuff. And I could only do a liquid diet for 6 weeks. And but part of me was really, I'm going to use a British word. I was really chuffed of myself. Let's say that again. I was so bloody chuffed. I was like, God, if this happened 4 or 5 years ago, I think this would have sent me to, who knows, hospital or something. Mm-hmm. I would have triggered a huge depression. And I was like, this is showing there's progress. I still totally whine every day about it, but you know what I mean?
That's huge progress.
Thank you.
So I bet you're like, yay, because I kind of had a similar thing. So when I was going through DBT for my borderline personality, I was diagnosed relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And I knew that if I hadn't been in some kind of treatment and I hadn't taken huge step forwards in my mental health, I would have gone to pieces and probably would have done something really silly.
Right.
So,
you can talk.
Yay.
Yeah, it is. That was a big triumph for me. But I wondered if I could just quickly touch on the 2 medications that have helped me, because I've noticed a lot of people talk about medications and they don't name what they are, and I'm always wondering, what is it that you're taking? Oh, and you had asked about the holy basil. I felt like it was helping some, but I just stopped taking it. I forgot why, but it was also not cheap either to buy all these things. But I wouldn't, as long as the doctor approves of it and it doesn't have it's not contraindicated with the other medications you take, I say go for it. And it's also in tea, so I would just make sure it's safe, but I would definitely try that. Mm. But I take the gold standard lithium, which I've been taking that for years, but it did help me, I think, keep me from being acutely suicidal. I think there's truth to that. But I still was incredibly depressed, as you both know. And so my psychiatrist, just as a total, he was getting a little bit not impatient, but God, nothing's helping her. And he was so nice and patient. He was patient. He's like, I'd like you to try this thing called an MAOI, this medication called an MAOI. And I'd always heard about them and heard that they were dangerous if you couldn't take them with cough medicine. I just heard bits and pieces.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that they had other things, you couldn't eat certain things, because my dad had taken an MAOI and he wasn't allowed to you can't have aged cheeses or soy products. You can't have anything that's high in this amino acid called tyramine. And if you do, there's a chance your blood pressure will spike, and worst case scenario, you could get a stroke. But don't, it's totally worth giving up a few foods and alcohol to be not depressed, in my opinion. So it did work. It's most effective with lithium, according to some studies I was reading throughout the years. There's very small studies, but they're very convincing. And taking the 2 of those things together totally worked. And it's not perfect. I do have some fatigue, and I never know if it's from life or from the medications or what. But I'm just so grateful for these little pills,
But you must miss cheese.
I did at first, but guess what? I just realized, oh my goodness, you just helped me realize this. Now that I'm a vegan.
Can't have it, exactly.
I have to make sure it doesn't have the stuff
because they do vegan cheese.
They do. They have all kinds of vegan cheese.
You might be able to have cheese again.
The excitement there.
Oh my God. That's so funny. I didn't make that connection. I'll find out and I'll let you know. I will. I mean, not that you're going to be a vegan anytime soon, but that's very cool.
Becky is a cheese monster.
My sister-in-law was a vegan for a while. She gave it up when she was pregnant with my niece, and she's actually considering going back to it when she stops breastfeeding my nephew now.
Oh.
But she is Italian, and the biggest problem for her is the cheese because she loves it.
Sure.
And she has to buy the vegan cheese because she has to live with cheese.
No, that's right. I mean, they have so many different things now. I mean, I live in Santa Cruz, California, which is basically like where about love hippies, rich hippies live now. And we have, a bunch of different cheeses at the health food store. And I have never looked at them, or vegan cheeses. I just didn't think of it. That's really funny. I'll definitely, just what I need to eat more food, right?
Do you know, she's actually saying that she's gonna try being vegan again, but she wants to wait until September because in August we're going to Italy for 3 weeks on holiday. And she's like, I just cannot be vegan out in actual Italy and not eat everything.
You do what you can, right? And that's great that she ultimately wants to do it. So, I mean, that's my new passion. So I better be careful and not talk about it because I could talk about that with the two of you for hours.
Becky is a cheese monster.
I love my
seriously.
Cheese. And eggs. Eggs is the other thing.
I know. I love eggs too. I know. And we have chickens. So at first that was a big deal, but just the thing is that was the thing. I couldn't even eat eggs.
Some vegans do eat the eggs if they're looking after the chickens and they're looking after them well because it's a natural byproduct.
That's right. So there's different shades of it,
So you could still have eggs.
I could. It's funny because now I stopped eating them when I broke my jaw and I just don't miss them as much. So it's weird what you can get used to. But as you can tell, my jaw is fully healed by the way I'm talking and yapping away. And our bodies, I mean, that's the thing. Our bodies are resilient. And I do tell people, I really do consider myself a worst case scenario in a lot of ways. And I'm like, if I can get through this, other people can get through it. The key is having a support team. I think that's the most important thing of all. Having anyone close to you who can help you because nobody should do this alone, right? Nobody should go through this stuff alone.
Well, I definitely think, especially in our podcast, we actually talk about, shout out to Craig, your husband, and how great he seems as when you talk about him in the book and how supportive he is, all the way through. And he does seem to have really been there for you. He
has, the poor guy. Yeah. And I guess someone said, he should write a book for, the perspective of being a husband, but there's first of all, he doesn't want to do that. And second of all, there are books out there that are written, I believe, by, the husband or the wife, or there are good books out there. I just don't, of course, know them off the top of my head, but but I just feel like things are hard in my life. It's not, I don't think, the Dalai Lama says life is going to be hard. I don't think he said it. I think he said it in a more eloquent way than that, but everyone's going to have problems, but it's just, I am able to get out and do stuff. I still have a lot of social anxiety, but I've been able to, when my book came out, I had to go give talks. I wanted to give talks. And so I really pushed myself to do that. And let's just say, a public speaking career is not in my future. I'll just leave it at
that. Does the social anxiety come from the bipolar then, or do you think it's a separate thing?
I think it's both. I mean, you hear a lot of people say they have both bipolar and some form of anxiety together. I think I've always had the anxiety since I was little. I think I grew up in a house where we had violence, fights going on a lot, and I was very scared. So I've always had some kind of anxiety. So that's something that's not all happy ending for me. I'm still working on that. And what helps is getting out and walking and trying not to drink too much coffee and eat too much sugar, but that's very difficult. That's really hard. But no more medication for me, as you both might know because of my book. I explained what I did when I took anxiety medication. And I'm going to do Rescue Remedy instead.
So really from that, there are two things that I wanted to kind of pick up on, if that's all right. So one of those is obviously Craig. Craig has the way you write about him is fantastic. Has he needed any additional support himself? Does he have his own support network just to help him?
He did. When things were really bad, he did go see a counselor a few times, and then he went with me to see my counselor, Ina, quite a few times. And this is interesting. Throughout the hardest part of my illness that lasted for years and years, he had a passion project going on. He didn't have another woman, but he seriously, he wrote a book that has been really well received, and it was about his ancestor, who was an aviation pioneer around the same time as the Wright brothers. And this was something that he co-wrote it with another author who lived in San Diego. So San Diego is about an 8-hour drive from here. And he loved it. It was something he did to just take his mind off everything. And he's still totally into it. He's given about 60 talks on this book. And
wow.
I know, and it's been out and keeps getting invitations. So this is a very unique way to deal with it. He's also a very hardworking, kind of a type A person. He always is working hard on something. So I know this isn't doable for a lot of people. Like, okay, go write a book. but it could be anything for other people.
But it's just a different passion.
Yeah, or it doesn't even have to be passion. It could just be getting, like you said, support in one way or another. The book gave him meaning and purpose and a whole different world besides the world of his wife is mentally ill, and he has 2 children he's taking care of most of the time. So if you could just have some kind of alternate, legal, safe reality. I don't know what your laws are in that lovely country, but you know what I mean. For other people, it would be a counselor or a best friend or a support group or a dog, or a bunny.
Yeah.
A bunny.
Yes. Or the forest walking. The forest walking you do, the forest baths, which I think sounds amazing.
It is. It's funny because when I started to do it, I didn't know that term. And then I just read my local paper, which I used to write for, Good Times. I read it every week. I'm sure you have a weekly there. You guys enjoy reading. And I talked about forest bathing, and it explained all these benefits, like how it can help with cancer. I mean, I was like, what the heck? So many different benefits. How the color green is a color we've associated since we were, what's the word, you two? You're both good with words. When we were, thousands of years ago. Primal. We associate green with an oasis somewhere deep in our brain. And I just thought this is really a validating thing that what I was doing really does help in ways I don't even know about. So I haven't been doing it lately. It's hard because around here we have really strict laws about bringing dogs into state parks. And I respect them. I used to work for the state parks, so I actually pay. I am good. I don't take Lucy into the parks, so there's not a whole lot of places I can take her. But when I do go, I just feel really good. And you have to be careful. Like, I did trip over a tree stump one time and I broke my collarbone.
Oh, blimey.
This was back when I was really depressed. But again, I was distracted. I had just gotten off the phone. I had an argument with somebody, not Craig. And this was when I had a little flip phone, and there's a pattern. So anyway, it could be any woods. It doesn't have to be the redwoods, because you don't have redwoods.
No, and actually, just after we finished recording the episode about your book, I got an email from the National Trust here, who look after lots of houses and green spaces in the British Isles. And they actually had recommended it because it was Mental Health Awareness Week. Their email actually said, this forest bathing thing, and was talking about it. And I was like, we've just talked about this. And actually, there are forests that in England where people can go and enjoy that, even if they're not all redwood trees.
Right. They don't have to be. As far as I know, it's just as long as you're around trees. So, I know I plan to visit there someday. I know you have, isn't there Sherwood Forest? What about Sherwood Forest?
There is.
Yeah, where Robin Hood is from. And the New Forest, which is nearer where I am, which is really lovely to go to.
That's awesome. So I thought it was fun to write about, and it was something positive because I had enough negative stuff in the book, so I didn't want it to be all gloom and doom. That's what I call a book that really brings you down. I didn't want a gloom and doomer on my hands. So that was the happy part. And I know you might have had, I know we're probably getting to the end of this, but is there any other thing you think is important to cover?
The one other thing that I was hoping we could discuss a bit was the stigma associated with mental health. So in your book, there are times when you have to fight against yourself about some stigma associated with your diagnosis. I was just wondering how you have dealt with that since writing the book. Has the book helped you in trying to remove that stigma? And also, how do others react to you when you say that you have this diagnosis? So I don't know about you, I think you're probably quite an open person. Mm-hmm. And if someone asked, you'd probably tell them what was happening and things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I belong to this group. You've heard of it because it's an international group. It's called Toastmasters.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I know there's a bunch of chapters in London, England. And so we were having an open house, and this was just a few months ago. And so we had I didn't think anyone was going to come, but we had like 11 people there. And my job was to welcome everybody. And then I had to sit with a few people and who they were total strangers to me. And one of them, I was talking to her and I told her I had bipolar disorder, and I swear I just felt like some kind of repelling going on. Like I was like, oh, I wish I didn't. It could be my imagination, but I just didn't. I don't know. I'm a pretty
body language tells us a lot.
It does. There's something wasn't quite right, and I did regret telling her. I was like, especially in that setting where we're supposed to be recruiting people to the group. But then I just thought, you know what? It's like, it is what it is. And there's not going to, people aren't always going to say, thank you for telling me or whatever, So, and it's still hard for me to tell people, even though I have a book out. I don't go around. I mean, part of me would like to go around and like hold it like a baby and just say, hey, I'm not a total.
Look what I did.
Right. And I actually, when a few days before the book was released last October, I had something really upsetting happen to me where my daughter was out at some kind of excursion and with one of her friends, and they were with the parent. I wasn't there, Craig wasn't there, but my daughter heard what the parent was saying. And the parent kind of was talking about me in not the most kindest of ways. And my daughter told me, and this is someone I'd known for 10 years who I thought was like on my side. And I was devastated. And this was just a few days before my book came out.
Wow.
She just said something like, someone was talking to her who I used to work with, and she asked how I was doing, and this person said, well, she's in Dyane land and she doesn't get out much, instead of saying like, oh, her book's about to come out and she's doing really well considering. Yeah. She like put me down. And I was like, oh my God, I wish I had a thicker skin to deal with something like this, but this is someone we have a lot of contact with. So I don't even know.
It hurts.
Oh, it still hurts. It still hurts. And my therapist is like, you need to just come clean with this. But I haven't run into this person. And
that's a big step though, as well, to confront someone like that though.
It totally is. I'm just not. And then, so I took the pressure off of myself, like I've done in other situations. I'm like, you know what? You don't have to do this right now if you don't feel strong enough. I could write her a letter, which has always been my tactic, but I don't even feel like I'm there yet. So I don't know if that's stigma from her. It was just like more like a weird put down that just really threw me,
I might be a little judgy myself in this moment, but I actually think that to do that in front of your daughter, I judge her more for that than anyone else.
Yeah.
I think it's unfair.
Yeah. I know. And it just hurts when I know she and I've never been buddy, but I didn't expect her to do that. I thought she was better.
Yeah.
Kinder than that. But so there's always going to be something. And it's like at a wedding, like when you get married, like really difficult things happen sometimes, like something that you think is a happy occasion, like all the, what is going to hit the fan. Can I just say, I'll say it in French. All the merde is going to hit the fan. Like I know with Meghan Markle, I think I just read like her father had a heart attack the week before the wedding and couldn't come to her wedding, and so here everyone thinks she's having this perfect life, but that's going to affect her deep down.
Of course. Yeah.
And actually the media were like, oh my God, she's not going to have him. How could he do that? And you're like, he's just had major heart surgery. Like it's not like he went for a walk in the park instead. Yeah.
But so life is always going to throw us curveballs, and you just have to just somehow deal with them. And hopefully you'll have a counselor or someone or friend who you can talk to about it. or a journal.
Yeah.
Or an online community, whatever helps you.
Or write a book.
Write a book. But yeah, the stigma, so I still haven't progressed. To answer your question, I still feel stigma towards myself.
Mm.
I don't think it's something that's ever going to really go away. I just don't.
It's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, even it would be interesting if they came up with a cure for bipolar. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But like, let's say I got cured of it. Like, would I still feel like damaged goods? I don't know. I probably transfer it onto the anxiety. Mm. Yeah. Scarlet letter A. But thank God. I mean, that's why it helps me. Like, I love these podcasts because I hear other people's experiences and they get my mind off of my crap, and they're interesting and informative. So I love it. I'm totally into podcasts, but I'm not going to do. Not going to do one.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It's like talking with friends. I hope your followers enjoy this too.
I'm sure they will. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much once again for coming onto the podcast. We've really enjoyed ourselves chatting with you about your book. And if you haven't purchased the book yet, everyone, there's a link on our website. You should go there and buy yourself a copy because it's definitely worth a read. And yeah, so thank you so much. And Becky, do you want to do the honours with Dyane?
It's okay to not be okay.
And if you're not okay, talk.
Yay!
Yeah!
That is so cool. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116-123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next book will be A Tiny Piece of Something Greater by Jude Sierra, and our next episode with Secret Psychiatrist will be looking at postpartum mood disorders. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter, follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends, and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.